everyone, I'm Sloan from SloanBella.com, and I am back with another energetic channeled video. Now I'm focusing on the energy around a particular literal event that happened historically and came into the news media within the past 2 weeks. This particular event is very, very enmeshed in many different levels of energy. Not just what we read in the physical, in this vibration at this point, on the TV, on the news. Not just what we see in the paper. This particular event, and with the people involved, goes back into many different layers. Just like an onion, we are peeling back the layers. There are so many different nuances to what has happened in this particular situation and where everybody is coming at it from this particular situation that it's very, very interesting. And the energy that is around this is actually coming at it from a very spiritual or metaphysical principle, although we will be told that it's a very literal and earthbound concept, but it is neither nor. It has combinations of all. So I'm going to start off just in the very beginning by describing the people that I believe were affected most by this particular historical event. And I'm going back to Canada, my homeland, where I was born, and I heard throughout my childhood mention of this, but very sporadically, not like, wasn't talked about openly all the time. But I remember vividly when I was basically in 8th grade and I went to a Quebec, Ottawa field trip with my classmates, and we were at Laval University, and there was a lockdown at Laval with armed guard people for some reason, and I don't even remember why. Just for a few days or a day or whatever, something was going on around the university and they kept the little 8th graders safe, I suppose. Anyway, in this particular instance, when that was ended, that particular part of it was ended, in the community, I heard a lot of conversation about Indigenous or Native Indians to the area in Canada. Now, Indians is a terminology that when I was growing up was not politically incorrect. So that's how it was repeated to me. But now we call them either Indigenous or Aboriginal people, and I'm not sure which because I have many friends and they don't really care. So at the moment, I'm going to call them Native people to the land. Anyway, there was a massacre, which was the way it was described to me, of 1,500 of these Indigenous people, and suddenly they were gone. And I don't know if this was on a reserve or in a residential school in that area, because I wasn't familiar with the area, but I heard that. Now, where I grew up in Toronto, up north in Brantford was a residential school for the Native kids that were taken from their families, basically stripped out of their families and indoctrinated in the European ways of thought, expression, speech, and consumption, meaning material consumption, money and such. And then what I am talking about right now is the Kamloops Residential School, which I believe was called the Kamloops Mission Residential School. And I'm talking about the 215 little children bodies they found underneath the schoolyard using equipment that was told to them for many, many years in succession that nobody bothered to look, or maybe they didn't have the ability to dig it up. I don't know what that's about, but it came forth now. Now that's where this gets interesting, because energetically the veil is extremely thin and we are being shown the truth. I tend to believe at this point in time, the history that we've been taught as children is completely agendized and propaganda, not truthful and not realistic. Like, groups and generations of people have been raised on falsities, lies, stories, made up shit, and who knows what else in order to hide the real agenda going on from behind the scenes. But let me get into the Native people, the people that were affected most by this, because the Native people, and I focused on the energy and I asked, what is the fixation with what we formerly called Indian, Indigenous, or Aboriginal people? Why are they targeted, either for good or for bad? What is that? So when I asked for that information, I was able to get a download on the essence of these people. They are very much in tune with the spiritual world, which means they see the reality of spirit, source, and God. They see it. They see it in the most literal sense. They understood how to put a family into a community and to protect without exploitation their people. That is not to say that there aren't some like bad, apples in the bunch, I'm sure, but for a whole, the group of people that was targeted were literally a shining representative. Now, I asked why that word came to me. Shining representative of spiritual source. So I wanted to know what that meant. What I was shown is that the Native people, since their conception, really were able to focus in the higher realms and higher vibrations, which means they were able to learn how to heal themselves off the land, how to live, how to prosper, and how to pray, okay, in their own native ways. They learned energetically how to keep that connection strong. Europeans at the time, under British rule, under the Queen's rule, under the monarchy, were the opposite of that. Again, not to say there are not good people, but they were all about materialism, superiority, judgment, anger, compliance, authority, control, stealing, plundering, raping, and pillaging. Remember, back in the day, that group of people known as the British Royals and their commanders and their warriors took over most of the world, and they came at it from the lower vibrational state. This is what I was showing. So when you have a group of people who operate and have an agenda to force those that they rule, and I want you to pay attention to the word rule. When you're dealing with Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, you're dealing with a monarchy that rules. The fact that they want to take a title of rulership over other human beings is problematic. You don't own or rule, because that's called slavery. I don't care if people don't see that, that is what it is. When you have rulership over something, you are a slave owner, because you rule over them, which means you have control over them. Another thing that hit me while I was channeling, and this is like a crazy ass thing, so totally has nothing to do with this, but when you're looking at monarch mind control, okay, and you're looking at the way that the mind fractures, all right, think of the monarchy, monarch mind control, royal family, monarchy, ruling a class of people, all people subordinate below them. Nobody incarnated in this earth to be below anybody, whether you like how they live their life or not. That is a reverse world and beast system mindset of which the monarchy is. So these people are agendized from the very concept of their rulership over their slaves, their people, the commoners, whatever you want to say. So when they see a group of people that is individualistic, creative, does not believe in consumerism, does not believe in the way the Europeans were living their lives, does not believe it because they have a direct connection to source. And when you see that in a person, you'll know it when you see it. Their eyes sparkle, they vibrate. The essence of them is really, it's really like a unique individual painting, and all pieces fit together and move in a spiritual way, and you can see it. I'll just use the word that it's sparkly. I'll just say it like that. There, you can see it on them. The monarchy didn't like this, because if others could see that way, even within the context of their own communities, and could follow that way, it means that more people would not follow their agenda. And the agenda is coming from a lower vibration. There's also a very interesting concept. These people were not looking for happiness or in the pursuit of happiness. Remember, when somebody tells you you're in the pursuit of happiness or the pursuit of anything, you don't have it. You are at a loss. It is negative. It is not there. It is not in harmony. So the indigenous people were living within the context of spiritual joy. The monarchy did not like this. It makes them angry because they operate off of a lower vibration. They are, if we could describe them as a whole, you might want to describe them as this new craze for selfish or narcissistic people, and the way that they don't connect with any kind of empathy or concern for other people, just for themselves. This is exactly what the British royals were thinking. Now, Canada, because I'm Canadian, well, y'all know this anyway, Canadian is part of the British Commonwealth. So all of our money has the Queen on it. We have to say, God save the Queen. That's our song that we had to sing in school. Save the Queen, not your parents, not your family, the Queen, as if she created us. The Queen didn't create anything. She made herself a little god on the money. Funny story, my father-in-law collected all kinds of Canadian money because he was Canadian, and on one of the bills, he saw the mint had printed of the Queen's face, that there were witches in a broomstick in her hair on these printed bills. They had to take them out of circulation. And I want to say they were $2 bills. I can't quite remember, but I want to say that. I might be wrong. They might have been $20 bills, $10 bills. I don't know. But anyway, somebody at the mint found it pretty funny that they did that, just saying what a witch the Queen was, and the witch was flying out of her hair. So that's ironic. Anyway, I digress. The point is, in the 1800s, under the British rule, these residential schools for these brown-skinned native kids were set up. The government, now I want you to hear that, the government decided that it was in the best interest of these children, children whom were not their children, children who were nothing like them, and they went and took these children away from their parents. They stole these children under the guise of a mandate by the government. Just saying. So these kids, some as young as 3, were shoved into these residential, institutionalized homes, as in very cold, no more parents, no more communities, no more aunts and uncles, brothers, sisters, cousins, whoever it is you're playing with, none of those people. Just these industrial, I guess, homes, like big schools, like orphanages, and these kids were forced almost, now think about this for a second, think about World War II, and think about the mind control that went on there. Think about, Project Paperclip and the doctors that were sent out into the world. Think about MK Ultra and the mind splitting. So they took these kids from their families, traumatized them, dropped them in residential schools that were run by priests and nuns. Yeah, that's right. The same priests that would never touch anyone because they're men of God. We're all children of God, unless we're children of the beast system. So the ones that are children of God are already that. You don't need a priest to do what you know you can do, because they're no different than you. Anyway, these priests, given their complete authority over these schools and run by the Canadian government, brutalized, raped, beat, and murdered these kids. This has been going on throughout history. I think they closed down in the 80s. And that's when I would have heard about the last massacre. It would have been in the early 80s. When I was in 8th grade, I would have heard about that right around that time. And I believe they started to close down the residential schools, maybe some in the mid 80s. But these schools were closed down. Some even made it to the United States. These kids were used as props in propaganda news over the Canadian broadcast system. The propaganda was that the kids didn't have families and needed to be adopted. So there's a whole bunch of child stealing going on here. Now, fast forward to 2010. Fast forward, and I'm looking here at my paper to see exactly when it was. Yeah. Fast forward to 2010. There's a man named William Arnold Coombs, and he was an inmate. Those are his words, not mine. An inmate of the Kamloops Residential School. He was 12 in 1964, okay? He was 12 years old in October of 1964 when Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip came to visit the school. This was shocking to him because there was no propaganda around it. There was no media, there were no guards. It was just the Queen and Philip, and they were taking the kids on a picnic. Yep. Anyway, they came and the school took a bunch of kids, age 4 up to 14, and they dressed them in like their Sunday best, and they fed them the day before because, you know, they were always starving them the rest of the time, according to William and other members who've been in residential schools. Anyway, the Queen and the Prince took these kids down by the river and had a nice picnic with them. So William and 2 of his buddies went back to the school. There were 7 boys, one of which was his friend George, and 3 little girls that went with the royals. They just went. He does describe a story where when they first met the royals, the kids were required to kiss the Queen's white boot, because that's what we want our children doing. We want them praying and bending over and kissing the feet of false idols who control the masses because they rule over them. Just saying. I want you guys to start thinking of it a bit differently. Really start breaking it down, because this is part of understanding what happened on an energetic level. So William is sent back to the school. His friend George goes with the royals. He never sees any of these kids again. Now keep in mind, they're in a residential school. They don't have family. They're not allowed to talk to their family. So they have each other and their friends. So he never hears from his friend again, ever. None of these kids show up on social media, show up in the city of Vancouver, anywhere in his adult life. None of these kids exist. And by the way, in these schools, they just booted these kids out between the age of 16 and 18 with nothing. Just get the fuck out. Bye. Out. Because that's the government. Don't let the government control your life. They do not have the authority, but this is what was going on. And it's like the foster care system run by the government. Where do the kids go after the age of 18? What happens to them? You just throw them out. Bye, you're 18. Fuck you. Get out. Your birthday. No job, no money, no backup. So no wonder it doesn't get fixed. I'm just saying, they take the money off of the slaves, okay, off of the backs of children. And I really believe that. Anyway, William grows up. He can't find any of these kids. He becomes a witness to the priests murdering 2 children, 1 boy and 1 girl. He sees them. He sees a priest digging in the back of the residential school, and he sees somebody thrown off a balcony. He speaks it. He probably drove him crazy. 2 other kids speak it. Okay, 2 other boys speak it. Nobody's listening, because just like with the priest thing, oh, a man of God would never do that. What people don't understand about what's happening in these situations where the sexual abuse is going on, like in these ritual schools, they are using a sodomy ritual in the occult to open access to the higher realms outside of the physical world. Look at it in terms of maybe just because you don't know it exists doesn't mean it doesn't. So they go in through the back of the body, up through the spinal column, known as the Kundalini. They apply trauma and it pops open the 3rd eye. Then they are able to hook into the child's energy, which is why children are such a commodity. They are able to hook into the child's energy and usurp the power source, the God source, to them. So they actually, in essence, can fill their fridge up with the essence of the child. So they are like siphoning power, energetic power, to live here. They are parasitic in the pursuit of this, in their greed and pursuit. It is ritualized. Now, some of the kids are used in rituals, and some are used in rituals to keep one youthful. You know what I'm saying that I can't say here. So all of these things go on. Now, if you study the occult metaphysics, you know that this goes on. I get yelled at all the time, but here's what I will say to people who are in disbelief. Just because you don't believe it does not mean it doesn't happen. So this was going on. These 10 kids never came back. Where are these 10 kids? We don't know. So the 10 kids went missing from October of 1964. And in 2010, William steps forward and starts telling his story. He tells of the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the sexual abuse of others, the missing 10 children, Queen Elizabeth, Prince Philip, and he won't shut up. The man is talking. He's talking to the police. He's talking, writing his statements down. He's trying to get somebody to charge the royalty, to go after them, to pay attention to him. And of course he's considered crazy, because why? This sounds ridiculous, especially if you are a mainstreamer who's listening to mainstream news, To me, it's very much like, you know, the Nexium cult. People are like, oh my God, that girl's an actress. She would never do that. She's part of the ritualization and occult practices in order to gain spiritual control over those that vibrate in different ways. That's what she is. Also, the Seagram's heiress was connected to that. That's all out of Vancouver. Vancouver is a portal for the beast system. I'm just going to word it that way. And the one that runs the beast system. There are many different components. The Canadian government is complicit in this, and it needs to be investigated. Anyway, William comes out in 2010 and starts speaking it. I've got to look this up here. I cannot remember the date. I'm just going to grab this and see if I can remember. I wrote it down here somewhere. I want to say William died in February of 2011, and I believe in September of 2011 William came forward again, and there were some charges pressed, and he was supposed to be going to Europe. I'm not sure if I have that date right. I wrote it down, but I can't remember. William in 2011 is ready to travel to Europe, and he is to testify or speak out about his experience. Keep in mind, whether you think he's right, wrong, or crazy, this is his experience. He's been telling people for years that there are children's bodies in the grounds of this residential school in Kamloops, and people are ignoring it, much like they did the priests, because they would prefer to think the priests are men of God rather than see the reality of who they are right now. Also, understand that in every organized religion of man-made concept, because we come onto the earth and we are told that the Catholics are this and they are that, and how they do missionary work, and how they go to other countries with more brown-skinned people, and how they help those people, which is how these residential schools were initially presented, as help for children that didn't have families. Even though they stole the children from their families, they negated to mention that. So the Catholic Church has been complicit in the prostitution, beating, and sexual abuse of people throughout history, okay? The nuns, the priests. Obviously not everyone, so don't get bent out of shape. But that's the problem. The problem is our society will not speak up against the man-made concept of religion. Remember, the Catholic Church, the Vatican, have put a spin on the reality of what they are actually practicing. And when you go into those churches for services, you have good intentions. The priests are taught backwards. It is reversed. So it is not at all what you think, and I can't prove this to people, but that is just the energy and the experience that I've had with looking into this energy. So just like the priests were excused for their behavior because cardinal law literally says, you cannot prosecute a priest because the Vatican is his own country. So they'll just remove the pedophile priest and put him in some other parish. That's what they say. Who gave them that authority and why? And what can we dig up under the Vatican? I'm just asking. We all know what we can dig up under there. But I'm wondering why they don't do an excavation underneath the Vatican. Isn't that a good idea? Should we petition them for that? I think we should petition for them. Also, while we're at it, why do they have walls up against their private country, the Vatican, and its own little community with the walls? Let's rip those down too and see what's underneath the Vatican. That's what I know, because I know the rituals that go on. Anyhow. Back to William. So William suddenly is walking down the street one day and finds himself in St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver. How did he get there? Well, it took 3 doctors to go before a judge and lie and say that he needed to be committed, because he was living his life fine, healthy at 57 years old, until he was kidnapped himself for the second time in his life, off his life path and into a hospital. Now, there was a nurse who goes by the pseudonym Erica, who was a one-on-one nurse with him at the time. He was her client. And so it's a form, as the way she describes it, a form of specialized medical care when somebody has a particular issue. So when she went in there, she was told that he was in an identity secure room. So she knew that he was somebody, but she didn't know who he was. And his name was then said to be Ernie Coombs. Ernie was his brother that died in the residential school. So they gave him that name, basically threatening him with reverse world language because his brother was dead and now he was taking the name, so obviously they were speaking it into effect that he was probably going to end up dead. That's the way I take it. All of this aside, William is in there. He was perfectly fine. All right. So this Erica nurse looks at the paperwork and it says unknown blood infection, which could be anything. Could be staph, could be TB, could be syphilis, could be I don't know what. But they were unable to identify it. And also alcoholism was on there. Now, when she went in there, she absolutely testifies and states he did not have tuberculosis. There are particular things around people with tuberculosis. I had a friend that had tuberculosis. I could hear it in his breath with his lungs. So people with tuberculosis cannot breathe. They spit up things. They're highly contagious at different states. They have a certain look. He had none of this. The only medicine he was on was a medicine known as Lasix, which people with high blood pressure know because it removes excess water or excess edema from the body. So she looked for the alcoholism, didn't see signs of that. But as she's talking to him, when it got later at night, he would talk almost in the way that she describes, like events were happening in front of him right now, but actually weren't happening, right? She said they weren't happening. He was in the hospital. She said he was committed against his will. So this was an involuntary hold against his will. He's in a lockdown, identity protected, and this random nurse is assigned there. So into her nursing of him, she's noticing certain things on his body, but she goes to her head nurse and she says, I think he's got this. I don't know what I'm doing, but what is this? Check this. What is this? Like, there's no TB on the man, okay? But they like to write that down there because they lie. Understand that the government lies. The hospitals that work for the government and get funding lied. It's an agenda. The pharmaceuticals lie. It's an agenda. Anyhow, William is there in the hospital. This nurse is trying to advocate for his health because she's a nurse. She said it made her want to quit nursing. The next day, she goes into the hospital and she describes an intimidating meeting with superiors at the hospital that seem more like henchmen. She doesn't say that, but from her description. And they basically asked her nothing about this man's health, just what he was talking about. And then they removed her from being his nurse. And guess what? He died a day later. Were you expecting that? I know, I was expecting them to say he hung himself from a doorknob. Anyway, this man getting ready to go to Europe and talk about Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip died against his will. Now here's the extreme shocking thing with St. Paul's Hospital, and I'm speaking directly to you in Vancouver. Since he was on an involuntary hold, 3 doctors had to go to court to say he was whatever, out of control in some way, either mentally, physically, or whatever, put him in a lockdown. So when he was dying supposedly of TB, they took him off of life support. They did not contact his remaining family members. They don't have to when you're on an involuntary hold. They don't have to. We call that murder. He did not get the same basic human rights, not from childhood, not anywhere, that everybody else gets in the country. And I don't even know what to say to that. William, the only living survivor of that residential school that spoke out and was invited to the picnic that Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip took the children on. He survived that. The children never came back. He's speaking about it. He's in the hospital. Nurse Erica finally says, I think he died of arsenic poisoning. Now, nobody knows this because they just took him off of life support. His family wasn't notified. Nobody was notified, and poof, he's gone. Now, he's gone back to source, to God, so he's crossed over, but he tried to talk, and he's extremely proud of what he did. It took every fiber of this man's being to speak out. It took him late in life. Not one moment of his life was spent in happiness because this permeated every part of his being. This is what I heard to say. Permeated every relationship, permeated everything about him until he spoke it. And so the wording I heard from him is, the truth shall set you free. The reason I think I heard this from him, and he's extremely proud, he went straight back to his ancestors. He stands there extremely proud with his ancestors all the way back, okay? He was supported by every male ancestor, giving him the courage to speak, knowing that he would be removed from the planet. Now, here's what's interesting. When he talks about what happened to those kids, he talks about it in terms of understanding the different tribes among the universe, and that those people in the monarchy, monarch, mind control, monarchy, royal family, it's subjects, it's slaves, herd immunization. He speaks about it as them energetically enslaving us. And here's the information I got from him. If we are attuned to the vibration of compliance and fear and violence and anger and grief and shame and guilt, what happens to a child when they're sexually abused? They carry the other person's shame throughout this life, so they are automatically in shame. What happens to a person when they become an addict? They are acting out their shame. What happens to a person when they are ripped away and told it's because they are who they are? The essence of who they are is not acceptable. It's fear, it's shame, it's grief, it's sadness. So all of these little kids with their super connected vibrations and sparkly energies were dumbed down to a level of low vibration. So just imagine them all vibrating in these schools at this vibration. Think of it in terms of cloud layering or smoke layers, different layers of smoke in a fire. The lower levels, okay, the lower levels are thicker and darker. The plumes are coming from there. These kids have now been basically stuck in that smoky energy and held and tied down to where they cannot vibrate up, and it's a huge problem for them. For the royals or the others that don't have a God source center and a connection to spirit, they are of the beast system, they are able to piggyback off of those lower vibrations where they feed, because when you elevate back up to source, they can't touch you. That is why it is so important before you cross out of this world that you connect with the God source and you pray. And that is why there are people in the midst of this spiritual war, World War III, spiritual and electronical computer war. These people on a spiritual level try to keep and bind souls from crossing out of this dimension. And they couldn't do it with these people, but they could harness their energy here and keep them broken so that they couldn't rise above. And that's exactly what went on. Now, Queen Elizabeth, to defend her, I don't know what went on. I wasn't there. But let's just look at who she hangs with. Jimmy Savile, 1978. Again, Johnny Rotten reported what Jimmy Savile was. Go and research him. The Queen knighted him. He was a handler and a procurer for prostitution of the wee ones to the royal family and the other royals. Now let's just look at the psychiatrist known as Anthony Kidman in Australia. Mr. Anthony Kidman was brought up on child hunting charges, not child trafficking, not child rape, although those as well. Child hunting, Hunting. Why do these people hunt children? Brussels, okay, Belgium, these places are notorious for this. Notorious. It's known within the royal circles. These people have appointed themselves controllers of human beings. So let's just look at this in a certain way. I'm going to use a modern day example. Let's look at Tina Turner. Let's look at what a great shining star Tina Turner was for her music. Yes, I'm really saying this during this whole thing. I don't know how else to explain it. Ike Turner popped into my head right now, so on it goes. She hooked up as a young girl with Ike Turner, who was older, her senior, and he managed her. He prostituted her ability to create, to sing, to shine. He prostituted it for his own self. He beat that woman down for like 30 years until she was able to escape him and become a massive star on her own. Think of the royal family in terms of Ike Turner. Yeah, that's right, Queen Elizabeth. You now be Ike Turner. Think of them in terms of that. Berating, beating, controlling, and subjugating and pimping the stronger energy than them. It's reverse world. This is what William Coombs was saying. Everybody look him up. This man died speaking his truth. He's a true warrior. On what planet do we allow the government to steal children? Who are they to take our children? People have to stand up. We need to stand up. You need to align with God, and it is a spiritual war. And that is my Kamloops video. And once again, my name is Sloan from SloanBella.com.